Well, hey there, welcome back to class. We are officially past the halfway point, so congratulations, pat yourself on the back. We made it halfway, and it feels like, I guess it feels like time just flies when you're having fun, as the old saying goes. So this week, our theme then continues on with some of the pieces that I think really resonate with our idea of holism and how we can apply that to leadership practice, to our own health and well-being, and to our health and well-being practices. And so that being the differences and similarities, I guess, between the true false and the false self, or the separate self. So the book we're going to read this week, written by a Jesuit priest, James Martin. If you're unfamiliar with him, this guy can write. It's just, he is such an outstanding writer and speaker, and just has written so many wonderful books on all kinds of topics. But in this particular one, he reviews the work of Thomas Merton and some other important people relative to the true false and false self. The true false? The true self and the false self. There also are some reflections for this week too from Richard Rohr that help a great deal bring some clarity to this issue too. So here's, I guess, as these videos go, here's my 2 cents on the whole thing. Just in a nutshell. So when the difference is, just kind of my explanation of what these two sides of us are. The false self or the separate self, or really maybe the egoic self is maybe the best way to think about it, is that part of us that looks at things that really matter in our social and cultural world, and we attach those things to our self-identity, and then we give them great importance. And that can be a wide range of things. And so those might be, as we, relates back to some things we talked about in Chronically American, but it can be our achievements. So it can be, say the number of academic degrees you have, or what your grade point average is. It could also be, the kind of job you have, or the car that you drive, or the house that you live in, or your title at work, or it could be, the team you play for, and how you identify with maybe the city you live in, or the country that you're from. So it can be, almost anything. And just from the outset, I want to just lay a foundation that is really important for our conversation here, I think, but often I think misinterpreted when we talk about something that is true versus false, because all of a sudden we label good and bad for those two terms. And hopefully, you're getting the point in this idea of wholeness, that everything is included and everything is good. Okay, so the false self, the separate self, the egoic self isn't something that we need to label as bad. Now, sometimes it can lead us to do things that aren't so great. That's a whole other piece of it. But the point of this is that, these labels that we attach ourselves to, like, Professor Lenz, Dr. Lenz, whatever that might be, can go too far. We can take those things too seriously. And by doing so, then we can start acting and behaving in ways that aren't so great. And perhaps thinking that, well, because I have this and somebody else doesn't, then I have a little bit of separateness and superiority to them, as we've talked about in the past, this separate and superior self that is our ego. And then, then sometimes things go south and somebody says, you're really not that great. You made a mistake doing this, and this, and that has some hurt associated with it. And why? Because, it bruised my ego. It means that something that I attach myself to or identify myself with isn't as great as I made it out to be upstairs here. And so these pieces of our separate self, our false self, our egoic self, are actually probably very much necessary early on, at least in the first half of life, where we have something to identify with, something to work towards, something to motivate us. And those are all really good things. And I don't want you to misinterpret this as saying, the number of degrees that you have or your titles or your house or your car are bad, because none of that is bad. You can live in the biggest mansion in the world if you want. It's just how serious do you take that as a label for yourself in then relation to the rest of the world and everyone else. And so if it, positions us to think that we are something different, that we are something separate, that we are something better than, and then we, have actions and words and things that we do that then stem from that make other people feel like they might be less than or that hurt other people, then it's not so great. But if we live in this giant mansion and we drive these fantastic cars and we keep all of that in perspective with the rest of the world, and we do our part in everything else, and we understand our role, then it's something different. So having money, having an education is not something to apologize for, or something that you need to feel because I have this, I feel guilty because other people don't. It's how you live your life that matters. And so most of the time though, having said all of that, most of the time we do very much attach ourselves to something. We all have an egoic self, and we all get our feelings hurt when something doesn't go right, and we feel this pain somehow that, well, maybe I didn't get as high a grade as I wanted to on this particular assignment or test or whatever it is, and so that makes me feel bad because I felt like I'd put a ton of time into it, I knew it, but geez, it wasn't what I thought it was, and that hurts. And that's a kind of a shot to the ego. And so I think those things we balance and struggle with our entire life. I mean, this is something that we need to try to work through our entire life. But here's the key: is that the front end of our lives, the first half, if you will, like we've talked about in the past, we're very much reliant on our identity. We really cling to these titles. We really think these things are important, that, I go to, this particular school, or I work here, or I've got, this achievement, or my family is this, we talked about this, self-identity, inside me, and also the people that, that I surround myself with or identify with. Those things are really important to us. The Chiefs are playing in the Super Bowl this weekend. I'm a Chiefs fan, right? So if the Chiefs lose, am I somehow bruised by that? Is my ego going to get hurt because I identify myself with this team, and geez, if they don't win, then what's that say about me? And how do I feel about myself, and how do I think other people feel about me too? I know that sounds silly, but that's kind of the way it works. We identify ourselves with things like that, like sports teams and, employers, or, the United States of America, for instance. And so when something doesn't go right, when something isn't perfect, then somehow that's a reflection on me. And then what happens if I feel badly, then sometimes I project that out to others to try to take away that pain. So one of the great pieces of this idea of holism that we're talking about is to recognize that that's part of us. And even probably in some ways a very necessary and certainly a good part of us in a lot of ways too, because it can teach us so much. So this at least this front end of our lives, where we're moving through this, heavily weighted separate self piece, hopefully transitions into recognizing the true self. And the true self is who we are at our very core, at our very most inner self that only God knows. I mean, we don't even know probably that innermost self. That's something that only God knows who we are. But when we become more aware, more conscious of the larger story, the story, and how we fit into that story, we realize that there's more to me than just my titles and whatever car or whatever achievements that I have. And that when we cling to those things, that it makes us less happy, and when we let them go, it makes us more happy. And as we move through onto that second half of life, when we move towards this true self and the discovery of who we are, then we come to an understanding that I am both. I'm both this ego maniac, and I'm a person that is the truest self that God knows. I'm both. Both the good and the bad are held at the same time, and being okay with that tension that is between the two, and realizing that is my wholeness. And then I see the same in other people. Okay, so that's where the leap comes for this. Where then we can start looking outward, beyond our nose, and look at other people and say, hey, you know what? They are going through the same thing as I am. They are going through this separate self, trying to move through to the second half of life the same as I am. And then we, soften a little bit when we start to recognize that other people are doing the same thing, that other people have the same separate self, the same fears, the same anxieties. They may not be exactly the same, but they all stem from the same place. It's a separate self issue. And that, those anxieties almost always, when we're offended, and when our ego gets hurt and we feel some sort of defensiveness where we start to tighten up and brace for some reason, it's all probably coming from the same place. I mean, so this separate self idea. And so think about that, maybe in the next week here. Every time you feel like you're like, ooh, that doesn't feel so good, or that hurts, or that, you feel yourself tensing and tightening up and bracing, and getting a little bit defensive. Why is that? I mean, why do you feel like that? Well, if we can, come to a calm place, sometimes we can then, see that that's really my egoic self that has gotten hurt there. And is that really me? Or is that something separate from who I really am? Is it something that's on the surface? Does it have any depth at all? And hopefully we come to some realization that doesn't have a lot of depth. The surface self is very, the separate self very much on the surface. And once we start getting some kind of understanding of the depth to who we are, then we come to terms with this separate self and say, that's part of me, but it's not the whole of me. That's not all of me. And you start taking yourself less seriously. And then you start to soften. And then those moments of bracing and becoming defensive, they become less frequent. And that's when you're moving to this, second half of life. So what does that have to do with this course? Well, I think everything. I think for us to be able to come to terms with these concepts puts us closer to this idea of wholeness, of our place in the whole, and how much there is to us as a person, and how we fit into the whole of everything else. But maybe even more so, it's how we then interact with others and the rest of the world. So from a leadership standpoint, it's really easy to see, that how our interactions are with people, perhaps maybe that report to us, or students that we're with, that they are doing the same thing we're doing with this separate self thing, okay? And that if they're not performing the way we want them to. For instance, say you've got somebody who reports to you at work and they're not performing in the way you would hope that they would. And then so you sit down and talk through that with them. That's part of this process to open things up. But then, taking this a step further from a leadership side, looking at your own separate self piece, how is it that you're giving them the guidance that they need? This could be a student, this could be an employee. How is it that you're giving them the guidance? Is your intention for the guidance reflected back on you because you want your own numbers to look better? Or is it so that they can move into a forward space, that they can continue to evolve as, in their job or as in life as a student? Or is it something that you're trying to get them to do something so that it looks better for you? And I think that's a really important question to ask in leadership. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to put this piece in this class, because I think so many times we are motivated, projecting our, we are motivated to do something, and maybe it's, to have our, say this lifestyle medicine program, that I'm running, to have really good numbers so that then the university thinks that that Tom Lenz is awesome because we've gotten this much weight loss and this much cardiovascular risk decrease and those kinds of things. And so then it becomes a self-motivation because this is back on my separate self. This is back on my ego to make me look better. Or are the things that you're doing in that situation for the right reason, for the purpose of the person you're working with? So for instance, with an employee, is it to help them evolve and for them to keep moving into a better space? Or is it so that you look better to your superiors? Okay, so same can be said in health and wellness, in a health coaching setting. Do you want your clients, patients to do well so that your numbers look good? Or do you want them to do well because, this is about them and not about you and their own health? And so it's something to think about and what our motivations are. I think the same can be said for our children. Do we want our kids to do well in sporting events because it makes me look better as a parent? I think there's a lot of that, perhaps that goes on too, or anything else, do I want the Chiefs to win because it makes me look better as a fan, as if I had anything to do with that game at all, right? And besides sitting on my couch eating chips, so I think these are important concepts for us to come to terms with because it makes us a better leader because we have a greater understanding of people and the people that we work with. But from a health and wellness side, there's no doubt about it. If we can move towards this second half of life, towards the true self, towards this greater understanding of our true self, then we soften and our stress levels decline, and then our health improves, because of that. And better yet, if we can get to a place that says, I'm all of this. I'm both the separate and the true at the same time. And both work together. Both are good. Both are me. If there's a place of acceptance rather than a I'm not that, I don't want to be that, a resistance, but rather a place of acceptance of who you are and what you are, the whole of you, all of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. When you can get to that place, then yes, we're moving towards our true self. We're moving towards a sense of wholeness. And certainly that is having effect on our personal health and the health of everybody else around us. So that's it in a nutshell. Again, very long-winded, much longer than I thought this video would be. But I hope that kind of makes sense. I'm looking forward to how you, what you think about Martin and the book here. And if you're interested in some of his work, do some Google searching on him. He's fantastic. And then of course Aurora is too on his work for this week too. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. And I look forward to reading your good work that you turn in. Talk to you soon.